Today is a great day because we have lots of stuff to put on the motorcycle. Lots to do, lots of different things to take care of, but I'm really excited because this means we're getting closer to getting this back on the road. Now, if you've been following along, this is a Ducati Diavel V4. It's a 2024 and it only has around 850 miles on it total. This thing was wrecked brand new, and it didn't make sense to me that it would just be scrapped. And so what I'd like to do is put this back together, back on the road, and hopefully make it just a little bit better than it would be even brand new. Now, this motorcycle wasn't just laid down wrecked. It was wrecked pretty badly. There definitely was a lot of work to be done, and a couple pieces that I've had to send out to specialists just because it's not something that I am capable of doing on my own. And being a 2024, this Ducati does not have a really good used part market currently. Now, there are some things on this motorcycle that are fixable that I don't need to replace. Some of those things happen right here underneath where the gas tank would be. Now, looking at this, there are a number of hoses and wires that are sticking out that were broken in the accident. And for most other motorcycles, it would be really simple just to pull out one of the fuel lines, replace it, and put it back. But because, again, this is a 2024, Ducati decided to do it a little differently. And instead of being able to remove a fuel line, replace it, it is the entire fueling system together as one unit that you have to replace. And it is very expensive. So expensive that I don't think it's worth it. Especially because these are fuel lines that are in every other motorcycle across the globe, and there are many different ways to fix a fuel line or to replace a hose that will be much cheaper and do a perfectly good job. In doing my research on how to repair this fuel line, I found 3 things that are needed to repair this fuel line. First thing we need is the repair hose. The second thing we'll need is a way to fuse the repair hose to the broken OEM hose. So that'll be what we call the fusing agent. And the third thing that we need is a way to connect the fuel line to the fuel pump, which will be a quick connect. Now for the repair hose here, it's pretty simple, just going out and getting some repair nylon tubing, pretty simple stuff. All you need to do is really just figure out what size tubing we need for our fuel line. For this, it is a 5/16 fuel line, and so getting that fuel line is pretty easy. You can get that at any hardware store. The fusing agent is a little different, so there's a couple options we can go with for a fusing agent or a way to connect the repair hose to the OEM hose. We have 2 different ways. One is a repair joiner that looks like this. It's a piece of metal that the repair hose slips over, and you can slip into the OEM hose, and there's a perfect connection between the two this way. Now, this option is pretty good. It slides into the tube. It's a really good connection here, but it is tough. It is pretty lengthy here, so you need a good amount of hose to make sure it sits in properly. And if you mess up at all, which I tend to do, then you're not left with a lot of play. The other option is a compression fitting. A compression fitting is made up of a few different parts. You'll have a compression sleeve, you'll have a compression insert that goes inside your new tube, as well as the OEM tube, and you'll have your compression nut. And that will all come together with this fitting to tighten it up really nice and snug, and then this tube won't come out on this end, and then the OEM tube will be matched on this side here. And this compression fitting itself will be what joins the new repair hose to your OEM hose. And finally, you have your quick connect. Quick connect is really just a piece that goes inside the repair hose and is part of the fuel line that actually connects the fuel line to the fuel pump itself. Now, in trying to decide which of those unions is going to be the best for this application, I decided on going with the compression fitting for a couple of reasons. The first reason being there's not a lot of fuel line left here to play with before this 90-degree angle. So to use this metal fitting, it would have to be able to slip into this so far to utilize it fully. And there's not a lot of hose back here that I have to play with. On top of that, if I was to go with this and it was to for whatever reason, ruin this hose, I would have only so much left to play with as you start cutting further and further back on this hose, which doesn't excite me very much. The compression fitting only takes up the smallest amount of this hose, and so if it was to fail, I am failing by taking the least amount of the original fuel line as possible, and that to me is the path of least resistance, and so that's what I'm going to go with. So in an earlier episode, we talked about how this motorcycle came without the gas tank. I actually was able to contact the previous owner of the motorcycle, and he let me know the gas tank was just way too far gone. There was no salvageable parts on this gas tank. With that, there were a number of things under the gas tank that were torn out when the gas tank was broken off the motorcycle. And then behind here, there's a tiny wire. You can just barely make it out. That wire is the ground wire for the gas tank, and that was ripped out. That needs to be repaired. Those are two major parts that we need to get fixed before we can put the gas tank back on this motorcycle. And so while we're there, while we're repairing some wires, there's a couple more wires that need to be repaired as well. Here off to the side of the motorcycle, there's a dangling wire here that's just missing pieces on this. Underneath here, we have some more wires that have been stripped out. We can see those as well. And both of these wires, I actually figured out where they go to. So this wire here is part of the radiator fans. And so this is the actual part of the, that is coming from the ECU of the bike. And then below here, these wires here are to the horn. And so what I did was I went ahead and I found all the wire replacement parts. I ordered those online, and we're gonna go ahead and get those put together today. All right, so it definitely is not the same day, but we are gonna get to those wires and the fuel lines. I was able to get the fuel line together. I got the quick connect set in, and I also added a fuel line clamp as well, just to make sure it's nice and safe. We're gonna go ahead and cut off that OEM line right now, attach the compression fitting, and get this line put together. All right, so what I want to do is I want to make sure that this 90-degree angle is very similar to what it was on the OEM stock here. And so what I'm doing is I'm just kind of seeing where that 90-degree leads to and how far back I should cut it, and have a lot of this new replacement hose in line. So for this new line, I have to add in the insert, the brass insert here. Get that nice and snug. This nut goes on, and then the ferrule. So what I want to do now is I want to tighten this up, and that will compress that compression sleeve, and that will make this nice and tight to this OEM hose. Okay, and I want to kind of put pressure this way on the fitting as I tighten it on, so that way it sits really flush to that hose as much as I can. Okay, that's nice and snug. All right, and now we're gonna do the same thing for the replacement line. All right, that's nice and snug in there, and we should have a nice fixed line with a quick connection to be able to go up into the tank. We're all set there. All right, so the ground wire to the gas tank itself is a very small 0.5 millimeter square wire, and that's connected to this spade connector here. I don't have any crimping tools, so I had to get really crude with how I crimped it. Just used a couple of different tools to get the job done. And yeah, I think it turned out pretty good. We got a nice crimp on it, got everything nice and tight. And now the job is to get this end of the wire connected to the OEM ground wire. And to do that, we got some solder seal wire connectors. We're gonna go with the red because this is a 0.5 millimeter square wire. And we'll go ahead, open this up, and get to it. Should be fairly easy. All right, to do that though, looks like we're gonna have to cut back some of this wiring harness just a little bit to get a little bit more room on this ground wire. So I'm gonna just cut back just ever so little. All right, now I purposely made this wire extra long. So I'm gonna cut back just a little bit, just to make it about the same as the other side of the wiring harness. All right, that took a lot longer than I thought it would, for sure. But you can definitely see the solder inside there has spread through the wires. So that's great. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wrap this whole wire up so that way it really just looks OEM. While we're already in the mood of fixing some wiring, we're gonna go ahead and replace the connectors on these. And these are a little bit different. I went ahead and fixed the horn wiring harness. This was just snapping really on a connector to the end of this, but these are a little different. These require insulated connectors that will slot into an actual connector unit. I don't know what these are called technically, but this is the male end connector that will go to the female on the radiator. So we're gonna go ahead and get to these. Two rubber sleeves on. And for the connectors, I wanna make sure that we have just enough. It looks like we have too much of this copper here showing. On these connectors, we want this back crimp to be grabbing the rubber of these wires, or the plastic of the wires, and then the front crimp, the fatter one, to be grabbing the copper, and we don't want too much copper sticking out. So it looks like there's a little bit too much. We're gonna cut that off real quick. I kind of pre-crimped these connectors because I don't have an actual crimp tool, and so I'm kind of doing it a little bit fly-by-wire here, pun intended a little bit. All right, and now if we look at the other side of the motorcycle, we have the same piece of equipment on this side, and you can just make out the red is on the far side and the black is closest to us. So we're gonna mimic that same approach. All right, so we should have a good seat in there. We have the insulation, and in the front, you can see the wires nice and seated. Good to go. Great. All right, so the last thing that we wanted to do was to replace the wire connector on the radiator. In a previous video, you'll see that the wires had been kind of stripped out of this, but we went ahead and put those on. Really, it was just snapping them into place, ordering a replacement part online, and then just putting the wires back in. Now that that's done, wiring should be complete on the motorcycle, and we can move forward. All right, next thing we're gonna do is get this whole area prepped for the gas tank, which means taking this broken part off, replacing it, and then pulling in the gas tank, putting together all of those pieces, and getting it prepped. Now, next up is the gas tank itself. And this gas tank came with nothing on it. It doesn't have the fuel cap, it doesn't have anything from the bottom, it doesn't have any hardware whatsoever. And so that means we have to go ahead and replace it all. And to replace it all, I got a box of parts. Now, in this box of parts is a whole list of parts to go on here. In that list, vibration damper pads, spacers, a set of 5x16 screws, some rubber pads, a cover, a different rubber pad, plugs, some 5x9 screws, quick connects, more screws, 5x20, and finally, more screws, 5x10s. So the only issue with putting this whole gas tank back together right away and slapping it back on the motorcycle is one big thing, and that big thing is right here. There is a little bit of damage on this gas tank. There's a little dent, there's a little bit of paint work that needs to be done. And because of that, what I would like to do is get the whole thing repainted, do a whole color scheme on the motorcycle. And with that in mind, I'm not gonna go ahead and put everything back on here, or I'm not gonna put this whole tank back together so I don't have to take it back apart, have it painted, and put on the motorcycle. I'm gonna test fit it for now, and then do the body work, get it painted, and then get it on the motorcycle. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get this just roughly fitted up onto that motorcycle. Are you ready? Here we go. And just like that, the gas tank is on temporarily for right now. It's held on by just a couple of screws, but it's on there. So she fits up pretty nicely. We got to get everything tacked in here. We have a couple screws here and on the other side that are just holding it in place. It's coming along. I like how it's looking. All right, it is a new day, and off camera, we were able to do a little bit more work. And it looks like, maybe it looks like, more work than it really is. What I was really able to do was just kind of put in place a few things to see how things are going with the motorcycle, how things are lining up, and what parts I'm still needing. So I was able to get the gas tank just kind of sized onto the motorcycle. We have a couple of fairing pieces that hug the gas tank here, which are held in place by the seat, and the seat is held in place by the rear seat. Now all these things are just kind of sat in their spot, and it's helped me in a couple ways. One, just to make sure everything's lining up, everything is straight, as well as letting me know what little things are still missing on the motorcycle. There's a couple of things under the tank that I didn't know were needed, that are definitely needed. There's a couple pieces to this seat that I still need to order, and then there are small things here and there that just need to be in place so that everything snaps together just right. And so that's gonna be pretty much a wrap for this episode of just getting it to where it is right now. In the next episode, what I would really like to do is get started getting all of the other fairings ready for paint. We're gonna be repainting this whole motorcycle, one, because the parts just don't match, and two, because I think it'd be really cool. Thank you so much for following along. This has been so much fun so far, and I'm really excited for what's coming next, so stick around, smash that like button, give me a follow if you can. Thanks so much, we'll see you next time.